Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 11. Formal Grammar Hierarchy. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. We are in Episode 8, The Pure Abstract Language. We stand at the summit of Book 8.3, Abstract Syntax. We have explored constraint relations, closure, and integrability conditions, the deep grammar of phi. Today, we step back to see the full landscape of this grammar. We discover it is not one simple set of rules, but a hierarchy of grammatical structures, each more powerful and more subtle than the last. The phi language does not just use simple grammar, it uses a layered tower of grammatical power. Today, we explore that tower. We explore the formal grammar hierarchy of the Holophase language. I want you to imagine that the language of phi is like a city of stories. Every story is made of sentences. Every sentence is made of phrases. Every phrase is made of words. But the city is not held together by words alone. It is held together by the rules that decide which words may sit side by side, which stories can grow inside other stories, and which whole histories are even possible. Those rules do not live at a single level. They form a tower, rising from local rules near each word, through rules that structure paragraphs, all the way up to rules that shape entire books and entire libraries. In the same way, the holophase language does not have a single kind of grammar. It carries simple rules that operate locally on derivatives, stronger rules that govern nested structures of derivatives, and global rules that look at the whole configuration of phi across space and time. All of these together form the formal grammar hierarchy of phi. Let us build this picture step by step, slowly and gently, so that each level becomes intuitive and tangible, not abstract and distant. First, imagine the simplest kind of rule. This is the rule that really only looks at neighbors. It says things like, if this derivative is here, then that derivative must be there in a proportional way. It is like a rule that says, after this kind of word, that kind of word is allowed, but not the other one. These are the simple, local, almost mechanical rules of the holophase grammar. You can think of them as the spelling and punctuation of change. They do not tell you the meaning of an entire story, but they keep each small piece from falling apart. They keep the field from tearing locally. They make sure that as phi changes in time and space, neighboring values line up in a smooth, compatible way. Second, imagine a richer kind of rule. This rule does not just look at immediate neighbors. It recognizes shapes, patterns, and layers. It says, whenever you build this structure, inside it you may nest another structure of the same type. This is like a rule in language that lets you embed a clause inside a clause, a story inside a story. These rules see the tree of derivatives and allow hierarchies to form inside hierarchies. They are the rules of self-similarity. They allow patterns to repeat within patterns. They allow long-range structure to be built from short-range motifs, the way a piece of music builds a large movement out of a small melodic idea. Or a fractal builds a complex coastline from a simple zigzag. Third, imagine the deepest kind of rule. This rule does not care about single words or even single sentences. It asks about the whole story. It asks whether everything that has been said can belong to one coherent narrative. It is like the rule that decides whether an entire novel makes sense as one life story, instead of being a random pile of unrelated chapters. These are the global, context-dependent rules of phi. They are sensitive to loops, to histories, to entire regions of space and time. They do not live in the small. They live in the whole. They answer questions like, when you go all the way around and come back, have you returned to the same state or not? And when you add up this quantity over the entire universe, does it stay the same? These three levels, local, hierarchical, and global, are the three great floors of the grammar tower. At the lowest floor live the simplest constraints. Mathematically, they are linear relations between derivatives. They say that certain partial derivatives must match, or that some combination of derivatives must vanish, or that one derivative is proportional to another. In plain language, they are like spelling and basic word order rules. They have small reach, but they are essential. Without them, nothing even sounds like language. In the time echo, a simple rule might say, if the local rhythm speeds up in one place, it must slow down in a matching way nearby, or the pattern breaks. You can think of a child on a swing who pushes themselves. If they suddenly try to change the timing of their kicks in an inconsistent way, the smooth swinging motion collapses. The lowest level grammar keeps the motion smooth. In the space echo, a simple rule might say, if the slope increases steadily in this direction, the curvature in the opposite direction must adjust linearly. Imagine walking up a hill. If the ground suddenly became infinitely steep without any warning in the shape of the terrain, you would say the landscape had broken. Local grammar prevents such impossible shapes. In the motion echo, a simple rule might say, the flow is always aligned with the gradient of a potential. This appears when particles slide down an energy landscape in a simple way. Their motion follows the steepest descent, like a ball rolling down a slope. Again, it is a local, easy rule. All of these are examples of basic, regular grammar. These local rules are the ones we often meet first in physics as students. Straight line proportionalities, simple wave relations, and small sets of linear equations tying omega and k and v together. They are the low-level grammar of smooth, almost predictable behavior. They give us harmonic oscillators, constant velocity motion, and other neat textbook examples. On the middle floor lives the grammar of nested structures. Here, rules do not only say A follows B. They say, whatever you build from A and B, you may use as a new unit inside the larger structure. In mathematics, these are rules that operate on whole blocks of derivatives, like gradients, curls, divergences, and higher combinations. They say things like, the curl of a gradient is always zero, or if you build a certain layered pattern of derivatives, it must behave in a specific way. In the time echo, this level of grammar appears when you see rhythms inside rhythms. A simple beat with a finer beat riding on top of it, and then microbeats riding on those. Think of drumming traditions where a main pulse carries nested triplets, then even finer subdivisions. The structure is not random. It is built by embedding patterns within patterns. In the space echo, it appears as shapes inside shapes. Small branches following the same rule as big branches. Coastlines that look similar whether you zoom in or out. Snowflakes and ferns and lungs that repeat a motif across scales. The grammar here is not just this follows that, but this whole pattern can be placed inside that larger pattern and still obey the same rule. In the motion echo, it appears as eddies within eddies in a turbulent flow, where each scale of motion carries a similar pattern of twisting. Large vortices contain smaller vortices, which contain still smaller ones. The rules relating velocities and gradients repeat across levels. This middle level of grammar is what lets the Holophase language describe recursive structure. It knows how to repeat a pattern at a new scale, how to wrap a familiar structure around another, and how to let complexity grow without losing internal organization. It gives reality its layered look: branches on trees, ripples on waves, harmonics on notes. On the highest floor lives the grammar of wholes. These rules look at the entire field, or at large regions of it, and decide what is allowed. They care about topology, about global conservation, about integrability around big loops in space and time. They say things like, if you go all the way around this loop and add up the phase change, it must equal an integer multiple of 2 pi. Or, of all the possible ways the field could evolve, only those that make a certain global quantity stationary are allowed. These are context-sensitive rules in the deepest sense. They only make sense when you look at the full story, not just the local fragments. In the time echo, these global rules appear as constraints on whole histories. For example, a conservation law may say that the total amount of some quantity must be the same at the beginning and the end of a process, no matter how complex the middle is. The details may vary wildly, but the global tally is fixed. This is grammar at the level of an entire timeline. In the space echo, they appear as statements about overall shape, whether space is globally flat or curved, whether a field configuration contains a topological twist or not, whether a region of space contains an unremovable defect that forces the phase to wind in a certain way. These are rules that care about the entire region, not just a single point. In the motion echo, they appear as statements about total momentum, total charge, or other global tallies that must remain constant across the entire motion. A single particle may speed up or slow down, but the overall momentum of a closed system remains constant. This is grammar that lives at the level of the whole story of motion. Together, these three floors form the formal grammar hierarchy of phi. Now let us place this hierarchy back into our larger picture. We said earlier that the master tree of derivatives grows from phi itself. The trunk is phi. The first branches are its first derivatives. Higher branches are higher derivatives. The complete set of branches at a point is J infinity phi, the full local dictionary. Constraint relations act like rules about how neighboring branches are oriented. Closure under differentiation is the law that says you can always grow more branches from any existing branch, and they will still belong to the same tree. Integrability conditions are the tests that check whether a whole arrangement of branches really belongs to one living tree. The formal grammar hierarchy is the next step. It tells us that the way these branches may be arranged is governed by rules at different scales: twig level, branch level, and whole tree level. It distinguishes between rules that only involve a few nearby derivatives and rules that refer to the entire pattern. This matters because reality itself shows us structures at all these scales. Some processes look almost linear and local, and simple grammar suffices. Other processes are deeply hierarchical, like the folding of proteins, the branching of lungs, the layered structure of the atmosphere, or the nested organization of galaxies. Still others are controlled by global constraints, like the total energy of the universe, the total topological charge in a field, or the overall stability of a planetary system. The Holophase language must be able to speak all of these realities. The formal grammar hierarchy is how it does so. It is helpful to think in analogies. Consider music. At the simplest level, you have rules about which notes follow one another in a scale. That is low-level grammar. At the richer level, you have patterns of chords and progressions, themes that can appear, be developed, disappear, and then return. That is hierarchical grammar. At the deepest level, you have the overall form of the piece, a symphony, a song, a raga, where the entire shape in time matters, and where an early motif may only find its meaning when it returns much later. That is global grammar. The language of phi has its own equivalents of all three. Simple relations between derivatives are like scales. Nested constructions in the derivative tree are like themes and variations. Global integrability and global action principles are like the form of the symphony itself. Or consider human language. We have spelling rules and word order rules. These are local. We have the ability to nest clauses. The person who came yesterday, who you met at the door, who was carrying a red umbrella, is my cousin. That is hierarchical grammar. We also have global narrative rules. A story needs a beginning, a development, a turning point, and an ending that resolves or transforms what came before. You can sometimes break local rules for style, but if you break the global narrative rules completely, the listener feels lost. The story collapses. Phi is playing a similar game, but with fields and derivatives. The formal grammar hierarchy is the invisible structure that ensures the universe's story does not collapse, that its nested patterns and global shapes feel like one unfolding tale rather than random noise. To make this picture even more vivid, it can help to borrow a simple idea from computer science, where people study grammars for programming languages. They talk about very simple grammars that can only handle patterns like A, then B, then maybe another A. These are like vending machines that read one symbol at a time and make choices using a tiny memory. That is the analog of our lowest floor, rules that relate nearby derivatives in a simple, linear way. They also talk about grammars that can handle nested brackets, expressions like A plus B, C plus D. These grammars need a deeper memory. They must remember that when you open a bracket, you eventually have to close it in a matching way. That is like our middle floor, the grammar of nested structures, where a pattern can sit inside another pattern and the language keeps track of layers. And finally, they talk about grammars that can enforce conditions that depend on the entire string or on matching patterns across long distances. These grammars are powerful enough to express constraints like the number of A's must equal the number of B's, and the whole string must satisfy a global condition. That is like our top floor, the grammar of wholes, of conservation laws, of topological constraints. You do not need to know the technical names for these classes. What matters is the intuition. The Holophase language does not stop at the vending machine level. It does not stop at the level of neat nested brackets. It climbs all the way up to the level where entire histories, entire spaces, and entire flows are constrained as a whole. This is why phi is a serious candidate to be the underlying language of reality. It is not a toy grammar. It carries enough structural power to describe the patterns we actually see in nature. Linear waves, layered fractals, and globally constrained, topologically protected structures. This also shapes how we would test the holophase view in practice. Imagine running three kinds of experiments. In the first kind, you probe systems that you expect to be well described by simple, local rules. You study small vibrations of a string, gentle sound waves, or tiny ripples in water. You check whether linear relations between derivatives, the lowest floor of grammar, already account for what you see. If they do, that does not yet test the full theory. It simply shows that the first floor of the tower is real and useful. In the second kind, you push systems into regimes where nested structure appears. You look at turbulence, pattern formation in reaction diffusion systems, the growth of branching structures, the clustering of matter on cosmic scales. You check whether you must invoke derivative combinations that repeat across scales, or rules that relate patterns at one level to patterns at another. If you cannot explain these phenomena without hierarchical grammar, you have evidence that the middle floor is physically necessary. In the third kind of experiment, you focus on phenomena that shout global rule. You explore topological phases of matter, interference effects that depend on loops, global conservation laws that hold with astonishing precision, or cosmological constraints that tie together the behavior of the universe at very early and very late times. You ask whether these effects can be reduced to local linear grammar, or whether they genuinely require context-sensitive, global constraints in the language of phi. If, after all this, the data keep pointing toward the need for global rules, nested rules, and simple rules all at once, then the formal grammar hierarchy is not just a pretty idea. It is a mirror of how nature actually speaks. If you would like to see the more technical side of this picture, how these grammatical levels appear in jet space, variational principles, and topological invariants, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that sit behind this audio journey, translating these stories into equations and rigorous structures. You do not need those details to follow this series, but it can be comforting to know that the narrative has a precise mathematical backbone behind the scenes. Let us turn now to how you can recognize these levels in the world around you. When you see a pattern that is perfectly regular and can be described by a simple formula, a pure tone, a straight wave, a uniform flow, you are seeing the work of low-level grammar. When you see a pattern that looks similar at different scales, or that builds complexity by repeating and modifying a basic motif, you are seeing hierarchical grammar. When you see a pattern whose identity depends on global features, like the number of twists in a knot, the total charge in a region, or the overall narrative of a life, you are looking at context-sensitive grammar. All three are always present, but different phenomena highlight different levels. You can even practice hearing these levels in an ordinary day. When you listen to a ticking clock, you are mainly hearing regular, local grammar, the steady beat, the simple repetition. When you listen to your own breathing, you may notice a slower rhythm with small variations riding on top, a hint of hierarchical grammar. And when you sit quietly and sense how your whole day, your whole week, or your whole life has a certain arc, a certain direction and meaning, you are touching something like global grammar, a pattern that only appears when you step back and look at the whole. In science, good intuition often begins as this kind of informal listening. You feel that a phenomenon is too global to be explained by a local rule alone, or too layered to be caught by a single equation with only first derivatives. The Holophase framework gives you a language to turn that feeling into precise questions about which level of grammar is truly being used. In all of this, remember, we have not added anything beyond phi and its derivatives. The formal grammar hierarchy does not introduce new substances. It reveals the different ways that relations between derivatives can be organized. It shows that from one field and one operation, differentiation, an astonishing range of grammatical structures can emerge. Zooming out, everything we have discussed is still one field, phi, and its derivatives, the single language the universe uses to write every story. In Episode 8, we have now traced that language from its basic alphabet of derivatives to the complete dictionary J infinity phi, to the grammar of constraint relations, closure, integrability, and finally the full hierarchy of grammar levels. We have reached a kind of abstract completion. We understand in skeletal form how rich the language of phi already is before it describes any particular universe. In the next phase of our journey, we will slowly begin to leave the purely abstract tower and walk toward the world you can touch. We will ask how these abstract letters, omega, k, v, and all their companions, take on concrete meanings. We will see how certain grammatical structures of phi become the equations of motion of physics. We will watch as pure syntax becomes dynamics. For now, as you look at reality, try to hear the different levels of grammar at work. In the gentle regularity of a ticking clock, listen for simple local rules. In the branching of a river, the veins of a leaf, or the structure of your lungs, see the nested hierarchical grammar of repetition and variation. And in the deep coherence of a life story, the persistence of a personality, or the miraculous stability of the cosmos itself, sense the work of global, context-sensitive grammar. Let this awareness soften your perception of complexity in everyday experience itself. All of these are expressions of one thing: Phi speaking in its own language, across all scales, through all levels of its formal grammar hierarchy. Salam, and peace be upon you.